humbly request Mohammad Zaved Akhtar, CEO and Managing Director, Unilever. We have Sourav Roy, CEO, Tata Steel Foundation, India. We also have Shalini Goyal Bhalla, Managing Director, International Council for Circular Economy, India. We have Enamul Huque, Managing Director, Client Coverage Bangladesh, Corporate Commercial and Institutional Banking, Standard Chartered Bangladesh. We also have Runa Khan, Director, Friendship NGO. She'll be joining with us in online. Dear speakers, I would like to call everyone on stage and take your seats. Thank you. Thank you, dear speakers. Now, I would like to request Mohammad Zaved Akhtar, CEO and Managing Director, Unilever, to moderate this session. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon. Assalamu alaikum and adab. Thank you so much for the opportunity today to come and talk about net zero and the positive impact. I think we've all been introduced uh, with the, with all the speakers. Runapa, I hope you can hear us. She's in Luxembourg. Thank you so much for making the time and waking up at some odd hours. I hear, but wonderful to see you as well. So
Very happy.
what we're going to talk about is how business and society and community can really have a positive impact by really turbocharging net zero initiatives. And today, if you look at our world, where we are at a really serious point where climate is creating inequality, inequity amongst people. And I think as a responsible organization, irrespective of what we do, I think there's a role that we need to play in terms of how we can positively impact and really create an environment where we can have a sustainable ecosystem, whether it's a business, whether it's a society, or whether it is a community itself. And without further ado, I've got a very esteemed speaker that I need to moderate, which is a very difficult word for me because if I have to moderate. But let me sort of start with and in sequence, and I'm ask Enam Bhai first to start, and some questions for you, and then I'll follow it sort of with the same question as well. So let's say, what is the need for businesses to set a net zero agenda within a growing climate crisis and loss of natural capital? So from your perspective, if you can just give a perspective.
Uh, Thank you, Jad Bhai. Thanks to all the distinguished fellows and in the audience as well. I think is this most timely fashion chapter that we are discussing today, and it's an important session for all of us globally. To set in context for that, I think the climate change is a greatest structural change and challenge that we foresee in the foreseeable future. And I'm not going to give here today or tomorrow. It's going to continue for a while. While Standard Chartered Bank has a presence dominantly for Asia, Africa, and the Middle East, I think where we have to have the right balance, a balance between sustainability in terms of climate change impact, at the same time, how it's impact financially in terms of livelihood of the people, at the same time, how that environmental actions and carbon footprint take our take the life of an impact of society as a whole. From the impact side of it, we see impact could be change of livelihood, change of economic turmoils, economic parameters, changes in GDP propositions. At the same time, we look at from the perspective of migration of the people. So from a country perspective, if we look at, we see cyclone each year for due to impact of environmental will cost us about $1 billion each year. Secondly, if we look at the pollution factors, if it's wiped out completely, it's going to be a 9% negative GDP impact. Thirdly, if we see that the way we have to articulate in terms of land proposition, in terms of environmental factors, one third of our cultivable land gonna be uh, zero wise by 2050. Lastly, we need to migrate about 13 million populations um, in every year if you want to balance up the net zero impact. Uh, from that perspective, we do have a mission accomplished in terms of how to see in the horizon, how to see at the horizon. If we look at the business factor has to be balanced up in between. So garment sector, who contributes almost 42 billion of last year's 52 billion export, if we need to align ourselves in terms of environmental factors, $18.75 billion worth of export has to reduced. On the contrary, if we want to align ourselves to the global, the temperature control in terms of heat rates going up, our internal study shows about an impact of 3 to 3.5 degree, which is not absolutely an admirable sort of a space that we considered at this point of time. And this is going to be by 2100, year 2100. So which is like 70, 80 years to go. May not be in our lifetime, but maybe for our next generation's lifetime. From that perspective, we intended to align ourselves as a bank on a 1.5 degree by 2050 sort of a time frame that's being aligned. Um, we have a research done, which is called Just in Time in April 2022, which shows that if we have to have a right balance between the developing countries' requirements versus emerging markets alignment, in totality, as an assessment, is about $95 trillion requirement for the emerging markets, which is absolutely emerging markets alone cannot sustain unless we see the right balances between developed market and emerging markets. On that note, the financials in terms of capital throwers, investors have a lot more to do. So as a bank, we are trying to bring a bridge between these two requirements. As Standard Chartered Bank, we have committed about $300 billion investment in different clients, different geographies by 2030. On that note, will be able to bring a lot more synergies among the investors as well as individuals, clients' requirements to take it forward. That's where I stop.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. It's very interesting to see the different perspective and the cost that comes in. Uh, I'll now come to Sourav. And Tata is well known for a lot of work that's been done over the years and now under the umbrella of Tata Steel Foundation. My question to you is what really motivated and triggered to really go down this path? If you can sort of give a bit of perspective, because this is not the last few years, building on what Inam just talked about.
So thank you, Zaved. Very good afternoon to everyone and to my co-panelists. And it's an absolute delight to be hearing what I've been hearing since yesterday afternoon at the conference. Uh, see the climate crisis, the impact it has on communities. I think there's been a lot of conversation, and I don't think it's a new articulation. It's been around for some time, and for many of us who've been practitioners, it's been around. There are newer paradigms, newer models, newer lexicons that keep coming in. All of them quite relevant, and that's what's happening now. Uh, for us, I think when within the Tatas, I think this is my 14th year with the Tatas, and we've been brought up on that old maxim that community is the center of the very purpose for which an enterprise exists, and we see that in practice. One thing that really makes a difference is uh, it might sound very simplistic, but I've seen it play out, is commitment to, say, climate ambitions or community ambitions and the need to do something beyond just what your business can do and solve larger societal goals. The reason for doing that is just because it's the right thing to do, you know. And the reason I'm poking this out is because at some points, uh, when you walk down this path, there are areas of conflict. If you apply a risk framework to it, sometimes it won't fly. A risk framework, if you apply a product framework to it, it won't apply to a product framework. So when do you take those stickiest decisions? And the one thing that enables it is just uh, understanding it's the right thing to do. We need to make it happen. A lot of us in this room are fairly fortunate to be here in terms of our circumstances and where we've come from. And how do you apply that education, that training, that skill sets into steering business in a certain direction? So that's one. Second, of course, I think there is an articulation of how do you look at this more business sense in terms of what opportunities exist. Uh, to us, I think it makes a lot of sense to apply a business lens to this, because some of the solutions, this is a little like a movement, but a movement needs an institution to rest upon, right? I mean, movements may not last entirely, but institutions do. That's the role of businesses. So applying the business lens makes a lot of sense. How do you make your product choices? How does one make technology choices? Our our nano story is fairly well known. Okay, I mean the jury is out on what kind of decision that was. Even now, I think I'm sure Shalini may have made note out of that. The steel recycling business that we've set up, which is probably the first of its kind at scale manufacturing circular business. So a business lens is applied. That makes a lot of sense in doing that. To me, four things that matter. Right thing first is DNA. How do you make sure that the conversation is happening at the right space? How do you create platforms where people can come and critique you also? And what happens is often in businesses, it's only now that they're waking up to what kind of talent allocation, what kind of know-how allocation are you making to that process. So for us, I think the moment it's the right thing to do, allocating the right talent, allocating the right people, allocating the right research potential, uh, recognizing that there are voices in the net zero argument which do not speak the language that you do, but it's very important to give them a podium, right? We've been talking of traditional knowledge. We've been talking of this thing. We currently, in the Tata Steel Foundation, we run a program called Samvad, which is probably the country's largest and most plural indigenous identity dialogue platform. And most of the stories that come, the feedback that we keep getting is this is one platform where you feel pride to be from an indigenous community. You're not looked at as a solution provider. You're looked at as someone who holds wisdom which I don't understand, right? And those things don't give quarterly results. So sometimes the toughest decisions are enabled by that, Zaved. So that's a short introduction as to why we do what we do.
Well articulated, sort of. I must compliment you. Uh, and the business case for a climate positive strategy is obvious, and it's so clear to all of us. But despite this being so clear, there are multiple cops that we have come out frustrated, unfortunately, isn't it? Despite the fact the conversation that we're doing, and the reason I'm just saying is the lady behind you has been in multiple cops as well. And Runap, I'm coming to you obviously, and the question is, how do you, because I think we sitting in this hall room, these are all converts. I don't think we have to convince ourselves why we need to do what we do. But how do you really create a growth model, a nature positive growth model that can positively impact profitability? Because I think where Sourav has hit the iron is actually that point. And this is the same conversation I have even within the Bangladesh policymaker. I said, listen, these are not incongruent. I am net positive because it has a positive impact on my profitability. I have a very selfish reason. It's not incongruent. So your perspective, and the reason I ask you is you've got both. You've got businesses that you run, and these are really fantastic social businesses. At the same time, you also done something that is completely voluntary and humanitarian. So over to you, Runapa, for your perspective on the same thing.
Thank you very much, Javed, and I'm very happy to be here today with all of you. I'm glad I could join. I want to step back. We are in this.
Hear us.
Can you hear me? Yes,
You're on
okay.
mute. We can't hear you.
No, I am not from my side.
Tarahan,
I am not on mute from my side. So
we, we can't hear you as yet. The team is also trying to.
I am not.
No, we can't hear you as yet. No.
I am not on mute from my side. I'm so sorry, but I can hear you, and my audio is on, so cannot understand. My
I spent
audio
4 years
is
of my
on.
life doing digital transformation, and I still struggle with these sort of things. Huh? So unfortunately, very
Uh,
basic things we always struggle. And
my audio
oh yes,
turn on the audio. Can you hear me
yes, we can
now?
hear you now. We can hear a bit too much now. We'll order. Yes, but Runapa, we can hear you. We can hear you. I think it's the sound.
But my apologies because I was on. From my side, it's fine. I can hear you, and my video is on, is my audio is on. But nevertheless, okay. Thank you very much. I'm very very happy that I could join because it's been a bit of a challenge traveling and trying to join this very very important and great panelists here. So yeah, I want to step back a little bit. Step back because let's say why is it uh, we do what we do on this planet. So if we are in a state where today the world is kind of divided into haves and have nots. Now, imagine a world where the haves are progressing and the have nots are moving down. This inequity of this world will not allow the haves to continue. It's very simple. And if that doesn't continue, be it businesses, be it normal life, be it the things we take for granted of the government providing things, healthcare is happening, the world will come to a standstill. And if you look at not today, and organizations and corporations don't look at quick fixes and quick wins, but look, if nothing, empathetically at not even, well, I would say not even empathetically, but selfishly, not at themselves, but at their great grandchildren. They still want their companies to exist. And if they want their companies to exist, it can only work if nature, biodiversity, the human beings are all brought on an equal platform. Of course, we need to definitely ensure, I mean, the world will always have people where there are those who are better performers, will do better, and there will always be those who are needing help. Agreed. But we cannot move and spoil everything around us for the sake of today. And I think this is the most important thing for us all to understand. There is all the corporates to understand. Unilever understands it. And I think you started all on the sustainable plan. There are many organizations in the world which are understanding. But the thing is, we don't have time and it needs to be done fast. It's not an economic forum like Davos. COP is not an economic forum like Davos, where you can do the economics in 20 years' time, also something will happen. It's today. And therefore, I think companies needs to really, really not only do it themselves, but be the leader of changes for others, for ensuring that you can make the others understand the importance of it. We are community voices. Community voices, Friendship calls itself an SPO. We're a social purpose organization. We are a not non anything. We are not a non-government organization. We work with the government. We work with the corporate sector. We are inclusive. And we are helping the world and organizations and the government to make the world more equal. This respect between different multi-stakeholders, I think, needs to be a very important platform on which equity can happen. If there is no equity in, in the hearts of the leaders and in the hearts of organizations and corporates, that is where I think the first problem starts. The heart needs to change, and they're all responsible. You started, Javed, by saying that we are all in this room. We've all we are buy-ins on this already. We all are on the same platform. So we need to be that agent of change here. We need to ensure that our voices are heard with those who are not part of it, because we need to deeply understand we cannot move on and continue even for our great grandchildren and grandchildren, even our children today, in a world where you are working and nature is getting spoiled. After all, this planet belongs to all of us. It belongs to all of us, be it nature, be it us. So we need to ensure that this equity is balanced not only amongst the communities, those impacted by climate, those who are the poor for other reasons, migration, whatever, and the companies and those who are the decision makers of this world. We need also to be at balanced and harmony with biodiversity, with life on the planet. And this means a deep responsibility of the usage of the fossil fuels that we do today. We need to ensure that companies move in where profit doesn't become the number one factor. Many companies is not number one, but now today it cannot be number two or number three either. It really needs to ensure that the front line is for the company's existence in 300 years, 200 years, and not today. And I deeply feel that unless we ourselves become the change makers, you as a company, Tata, I know I have been quoting Mr. Tata all my life, that the communities are the very reasons for our existence. And be it because at the end of the retail chain, it is them. And it is the same for us, for our organization and organizations like ours. At the end of the day, it is the retail, that one person which matters, that one life which matters. And unless we become the stakeholders and we do our responsibility as stakeholders, I think it's going to be extremely difficult. And having all the conferences, having all the cops and all these, it's only part of a solution. We need to accept that solutions have to start, it has to happen, and it's not pilotitis projects, but projects which are working, which needs to be scaled and scaled very responsibly. And it's so much bigger than just one organization, one country, that the solidarity, the global solidarity, has to really take steps. Otherwise, I think it's going to be a world where we would not like to really exist, perhaps. So, thank you.
No, no. Thank you so much, Runapa. Uh, I think there are two things I pick up, and I love this phrase that you've used, leaders of change. And I think all of us have this responsibility of being leaders of change. And the second one you talked about is heart. And I'll narrate a personal story that I have, and I always say, when I was growing up, my father's biggest worry was that he won't leave me behind any financial liability. Today, my biggest worry is not financial liability, and he didn't, by the way. He paid off all his debts before he passed away. But right now, my biggest worry is I've got two sons that I leave them behind in a climate debt. I honestly don't know
Yes.
how to solve for it. But as you rightly said, it is not one people, one person, but how collectively we really push this envelope, because this is exactly what it needs to be done. And it's a big thing, I know, but all of us have to do our own stuff. Thank you so much, Runapa, for that. But see, I'll come back to you again, so you need to be there with us for a bit. But let's
Yes.
go to Shalini. Now, Shalini, coming to you, you've worked with a lot around circularity. You work with Niti Aayog as well. Now, what are the areas or the opportunities that you see for global organization? And we talked about SCB and Tata today, and I know in Unilever we do a lot, but for many of us and many of our organization and companies today are becoming global. How do they really take initiative to become net positive?
Thank you for that question. I believe you all from the corporate world has a better answer to give to this question. But at the same time, since you have put this question to me, uh, I think it all begins with willingness, which is the most important thing when we talk about net zero. Circularity, as such, is a little complex topic when we talk about it, because right now, if I look at economies worldwide, a lot of economies talk about recycling as circularity, which is, though used as an interchangeable term, it is not. Uh, but net zero certainly is a strategy that the corporate should look at, and I think is looking at. A lot of global corporates are definitely kind of looking at what transition they could make. One, it gives them a competitive advantage. Second is, I think, a lot of it comes from the willingness, as you said, Tata's is very well known for it. Uh, Third, also, is because the changing policy landscape is an extremely let's say enabling environment for the corporates to do that. uh, Also, then there is another very important factor is the global supply chains that needs to be mandated when you are covered under not only just one country's policies, but the international policies have to be looked at. So looking at that, when I see the corporates, I think a few things that come to my mind towards managing it is definitely to know your waste streams. So when I work with the corporates, what I see is most of the times, uh, I would talk particularly about India, the waste streams and the waste that they produce is not documented anywhere. I think the documentation does lack. So the awareness of what is being produced in the production houses is not known. Then we come to scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. I think scope 1 and 2, now that ESG has been a part and has been regulated by SEBI, there are still, I think they're talking about scope 1 and scope 2, but when it comes to scope 3, I think again a lot of work needs to be done in that area, and it really needs to see how the entire supply chain management will be growing net zero, which is, I think, a humongous task, but somewhere down the line it will be very much required as well. Another important factor, as we know, is energy. And within energy, I see there is a lot of movement driven in India, particularly by our Honorable Prime Minister, towards the solar transition and renewable energy, focus on renewable energy. And I think corporates are responding to it very well. But since energy plays the major role, I think it is a positive. This is already moving in the positive direction. The next very important factor that comes to my mind is the wastewater, because uh, that is one area where I think stringent policies are still kind of need to be looked at. Uh, I would say specifically again for India, and since you mentioned that I work very closely with Niti Aayog as well, and I see how the policies are changing. One of the policy landscape change that uh, needs to be looked at is right now EPR is driving the entire market, which is end of waste life management. And if you really look at the EPR policy, it really talks about what happens to the product at the end of the life cycle. But is that what we are looking at? If you really need to work towards net zero, the focus should also shift from that end of life waste management to the production design phase. And I think that is one area where the corporates definitely need to work upon how to change the product designing, which is more environmentally suitable. And last but not least, I think corporates are playing a very important role through their CSR, the corporate social responsibility, towards creating an awareness. And I know Tata's has been doing a wonderful job. And thanks about this Samvad dialogue that you told. I was not aware of it, but this is definitely one very good initiative. I think the awareness that the companies needs to create amongst their consumers is another very, very important thing. So perhaps a lot of movement is already happening. A bit towards improving to the product design phase is something that I would say, and scope 3 emissions that needs to be focused on. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Shalini. Interesting the point that you made to know your waste tree. And I can tell you it was a reality for us a couple of years back when we started plastic collection. We really didn't know what was happening across the value chain. And surprisingly, neither did the overall ecosystem. I can so much connect with that itself. And the second one you talked about is the competitive advantage it gives. And I'll tell you a story of competitive advantage. A lot of time, many of these initiatives we see, these are additional costs. And hence, even within the organization, you see barriers. But the moment you delink and unlock that, you will see quick adoption. In fact, even within my organization, I've seen when we've actually been able to crack the models, you've seen huge amount of adoption. In fact, very similar, I'm sure, technically, let's say in green financing, when you come into it, and you will see huge adoption when you know that you're getting much more value. Now, coming on the topic of green financing, you know whom I'm coming next, but we've really talked about what. But I just thought now we'll move to a bit more around the how. that how do you really move this needle? And I know sort of you're very keen on that as well. So I'll come to you after that, but maybe starting with Enamul, you itself, that how do you really get into this how of doing it? And really some of this is where the rubber hits the road. This is where huge amount of cultural change required, a lot of resistance also within the organization as you make those changes. So over to you.
Thank you, Javed, and thank you, fellow panelists as well. So, all of you have highlighted in details the context of today's discussion topics. So, if I go on my personal background as well, and apart from what I like to highlight, I'm a banker for 24 years. So, and we are at the borrowed world of our kids. So, what we do, it gonna our future generation gonna have an impact onto that. So my father and my younger brother, both of them are PhD holders, and both of them are more of environmental scientists sort of an areas. I used to joke with them, what an area that you guys are focused on. But trust me, out of my 24 or so years of experience, probably I'm focused on greenery sort of things for the last 7, 8 years. And then that's an honest confession. Why I'm saying so, when I go to in the Bangladesh context, the river Buriganga, that I'm from Borisha. So when I used to go there, it has even a wider water body. The water level was so clean and others. If you go today, it's a so narrow passage, so shallow waters, and the quality of the water is so poor. So that's really heartbreaking. As a banker, we used to finance a hell lot of factories, and the waste management was the last part of our thought process, which got completely changed since 2013. So it's like before visiting a client, we go and see the wastewater management first, and then it's not a zero discharge or it's an environmental friendly water treatment plant, but is it a biological plant or not? That we look into that details apart from the financials that we see for the corporates. So on that net zero perspective from COP26 and COP27 transitions, and then the amount that we need, what we see is investors' activities has gone up significantly. 61% of investors will not invest in a company that lacks on zero emissions. That's our findings from two of our research. One is a carbon dated, and another one is a zeroism. So if you can search in the internet, you can get those reports. Global supply chain management for multinational companies contributes almost 73% of discharge. And 78% of the MNCs are now saying that if you don't have a plan of actions by 2025 and fully implemented by 2030, the 78% of the MNCs say that we're not going to finance you anymore, or we're not going to procure you from anymore. So where, as a financial institutions, we see a right bridge in terms of investment opportunities and bringing the corporates who wants to take the first mover advantage and helps in terms of our ESG goals. So I'd like to highlight a couple of factors that how as a bank we have supported and at least started apart from the green investment sort of a climates. We did first ever green bond for Bangladesh entity, which is called Pranagro. That's 2021. We did first zero coupon bond for green finances in Sajda Foundations. We have started opening sustainable trade finance transactions like complete green source procurement of cottons, the raw cottons produced by Square, and that transitions through Ecotex for use of garments productions. Last 3-4 years, we see multiple garment factories coming up with recycling of fabrics, and all international buyers has putting a hell lot of pressure. It's not just government initiative. We see the clients are coming up their own plan in terms of how to reuse of fabrics as a green transmissions. Lastly, I like to highlight that two factors. One is we are also now sourcing for sustainable deposits, and sustainable deposits only can be deployed for sustainable purpose funding. So that's where Standard Chartered Bank as a multinational bank has coming up long way. Uh, Recently, you mentioned about Tata's steel. So Uh, First time JICA is coming up in this part of the world for a private sector funding on a green sort of certified steel factory manufacturing plant in Bangladesh to the quantum of $250 million, where Standard Chartered Bank is fronting that. So it shows that if willingness are there, there is a way to look at it and profitably financially. In our recent summit in CXO summit, where Unilever and Parfait Van Melle was showing that how their product designing helping in terms of zero discharge going forward. So that's the way to look at it, and Standard Bank going to be in the front in terms of financing such requirements.
Great, thank you so much. Who could have thought of green bonds and green finance, let's say 20 years back? I couldn't, honestly. But I think some wonderful examples, definitely, and that's how we're moving the needle. So over to you also, just to give a perspective on this and how can you really speed it up?
Uh, so thank you. I think the way green financing has actually leapfrogged and the kind of pressures that it's putting, I think it's a great spur for positive action, actually. So, uh, 4 points on this. I think, as I said earlier, this entire net zero, this narrative piece, or what we're doing from a societal perspective, is actually, it has to be taken as a movement which is predicated on an institution. That's where I was looking at. So the first one, as I said, is everyone's being very kind to the Tata story. We've also made a share of mistakes. We've also done this thing, but that's what it is. But when a lot of us look at it, the feeling that we have is the responsibility that 20 years hence, people have the same narrative about the Tata's. The responsibility now is on us. So you have, leadership who understands, who's conscious. It's in the DNA. So first is, if you are looking at board level conversations, if you're looking at governance level conversations, uh, are the conversations happening in all their, how does it put it, in all their aspects and not just in a very unidimensional manner? Does your board reach out to create capacity, or do we just assume that because they're the board of a company, they're, uh, in Hindi they say sarvaguna sampan, so and does your board have the humility to do that? And we've seen our boards who do that. uh, Also, one thing that has worked really well for us, you take the smartest people in your businesses, in your companies, and just put them out amongst communities and immerse them in create experiential pangs, and then the rest, basically it's a basic trust model. So for us, what we do is we take the brightest talent that we have and take them out for at least 15 days, in unfamiliar communities, not to go and review an education program or not to go and review a health program, but just go and be and get those sensitivities, learnings, have an idea that there are people whose narratives are very different, and get them back and apply it, however, in your own way, in your circumstances, and maybe have policies which says that if you haven't done that, then you can't be elevated above a certain level in the company. Just hard code that a bit. So that's the DNA piece. The product choices, so that's one. Second is product choices. I think what products you're getting into, etc. Processes. Uh, uh, the waste tracking is a process. How do you look at business processes and sort of make sure that this is embedded in that? So we were speaking about discount rates in the morning. We mentioned hurdle rates. Uh, we came up with a carbon price, which is an internal hurdle rate for internal evaluation of capital investment projects. So any project which is more polluting than, say, other projects is more expensive on our drawing board before anyone else asks us. We're trying to do something similar from a social impact perspective, except that social capital is a much tougher one to get the economics around it correct. So how do you look at these processes? And the fourth one is everything that we have, know-how, resources, mandates, throwing them at solving larger societal issues, and just recognizing that, I think, to borrow a phrase from Runaji over here, is, unless you are conscious of the fact that there are people who are being left behind, uh, significantly so, and and in doing whatever, taking up larger societal challenges, not just being bound by, to me, I mean, the collaboration is being spoken about. Large scale, fantastic collaboration doesn't happen when you just look 100 meters away from your business. You sort of, look outside and come back and do that. A big, from the climate perspective, a big one, since we mentioned dialogue and all, a big one to be the economic approach, and Professor Saab has been talking about it since yesterday, is how do you look at natural assets as public goods, right? So that's where the economic narrative is. But if you actually go and look at indigenous communities, you go and look at the administrators of natural assets, they don't look at it as public goods. So there's a behavioral dissonance with the economic model. And if you don't recognize that and try and solve some of these problems, and everyone is sort of clawing at one part of it. So how do businesses be conscious of this from the first point I made to actually throwing everything you have to sort of solve that? So that's what I had.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Very interesting perspective. And I think the point on solving the larger problem is so central. And I'll give an example where I know for a fact, and it's a sad example, where where there are ETPs being set up and ETP is not being run because the fine of ETP is cheaper than the cost of running. Now you can't, because you are not taking, and as Professor has talked about, because you see environment degradation as a public, yeah, as well, and don't look at it as a cost. So Runapa, next to you, I'm conscious, I know you probably have to run somewhere. Coming to you, now, as I said, we were talking about a how. Now coming from your angle itself, what are the nature positive business actions that you believe we can take more in terms of, and if you look at, there will be some people who are much more ahead of this curve, there will be some people who probably are beginners, and we need to take everybody along as well. So how do you really approach that?
Okay, thank you very much. And I have really taken on, what are my panelists have said, Shalini with her work, and Sourav and Mr. Enamul. It's very interesting. You see, for me, it's always that when we go in for work, there are some things, if you work with verity, it's a natural process. Things become a natural process. For example, you take the values of friendship, which you know that I'm always at it. The values of friendship are not its limiting factor, it's the very essence on which it works. As a result, what happened? With solars, when I saw 1 million solar panel being put in, and everybody was doing a lot of solar panels, individual home systems, and these panels at the end of the day with batteries in the water, which I've seen with my own eyes, and 1 million solar panel is 2 days of energy of someone, use of energy of someone in Europe. I needed to totally revise, is this what I want to do? Even if we do millions and millions of solar panels, at the end result will neither be nature friendly, because it's only kind of a mark that we have done so much. And as a matter of fact, we become polluters because these batteries are not recycled properly. So we started the solar villages where we are responsible for the batteries, and we have an AC current link to the villages, and it works. We take care. When we speak about nature-based solution or locally led adaptation solutions, for me these are all words, because I'll tell you, if you want to do something properly, these are in the course of your work. They must come naturally to your work. When going along the river, we work on the rivers, and on the river we see these fabulous cement flood shelters being built, and within 6 months fall into the water. Schools fall into the water. All the cement, everything, it all goes in. Where is nature-based solutions? Is that the right thing to do? A responsibility of the money, responsibility of the hope of the people, responsibility of ensuring safety, security, and leaving a path where people can turn around and say, that's an example. We are doing none of that. So we needed to do something where we needed to work in harmony in ensuring that the human rights or the trail of human dignity is ensured, and the trail of ensuring that we work with climate and not always force things against that climate is happening. So we have our plinths, totally villages, people come in for security, safety, oval shaped, strong, so we are building like 2022 of these plinths. Everybody's taking shelter there, made by the community. Okay. Then we have our mangrove reforestation. When one looks, why I'm giving these examples is not because we are doing it, but it's because the way that the perspective in which one starts work. And this is something which Mr. Sourav also kind of said, how you start identifying the right project to do.
So in the mangroves, for example, there is carbon sequestration. If that becomes your target, you don't need to invest anything. Just go and buy any land where there is no human beings on it in the Amazon or somewhere, and seeds will come by itself and trees will grow by themselves, and it works. And you can just buy that land, and that is it. You will have your carbon sequestration and your carbon compensations in a few years, 4 years, 5 years, as the tree grows. But when you start looking at the bigger picture, Bangladesh is a country which, on average, is about 5 meters above the sea level. Whatever we do with the community, the gray belt of protection, which is the embankment, is not the first gray belt. And this is what I spoke at the World Bank, that it is not this is not the first. The mangroves has to be the first belt of protection for Bangladesh. And but in this mangroves, what is happening? There are people who are working on the land, on this land which initially had mangrove. So it's more expensive to ensure the working of one single mangrove tree, where the impact is multiple, not only of carbon sequestration, but protection of embankment, protection of the families living behind the embankment, protection of their livelihood, which is their soil, and the earth, which is behind that. It's a whole chain which you're protecting, you're saving. And as a bonus, you're getting food, crabs, herbal herbal things out of the mangroves. So you see, it's the way that you start thinking. You don't start thinking with providing carbon sequestration for somebody's conscience, but what you start doing is ensuring that this starts because you want people to be secured. You want biodiversity to happen. You want that peace to exist in that area and harmony with nature to move on. And in doing so, you come up with a solution which actually works. In 4 years' time, 5 years' time, people are harvesting from those mangroves that we've done. But we needed that initial investment of far more than what is calculated. So the work of nature-based solution, giving back to nature, working in a responsible way, is not a decision which is taken solely, by one company. It has to be in the very essence, nature of how you work, the focus that you see ahead, not looking at oneself for today, but looking at the whole organization. The people in your organization is also your responsibility, not only the beneficiaries or not only the people that you're serving. It's the organization is your beneficiary, and each individual, the community, and all the stakeholders whose money you're sparing and who have stakes, be it a company, be it an organization. I don't see really a difference in the working pattern of a good, we call it an SPO, an NGO, or a corporate. At the end, management is management, and that essence of management, needs to come right from the top to the cleaner, to the gardener, to the boatsman that you're working with. And if this can be put in as an essence of the organization, the decisions made even at the grassroots and at the top will not, on the whole, go wrong. So I think this spirit needs to be put into more of the organizations, more corporates, and I think value will come by itself. Verity has a way of pushing through things, and one can see that. I see it in so many people and so many organizations. Thank you.
Thank you, Rona. And I love the passion and how you talk about and really bring it out. I think that's wonderful. And you're so right. If the essence is not there, and if you don't see it, and if you're unable to dimensionalize the impact that it has in the ecosystem, you won't be able to progress. I'm conscious everyone here has been listening to us patiently, and I'm the only one who's asking question. Well, that's the best part of this role, actually. I keep on asking, and the great answer come. One more question, and then I'll go to the floor, and you probably can ask. So, Shalini, you've heard everyone on how they can do, and from your perspective, because it is not just the organization, not the NGOs, but collectively civil society, individual. How do you think we can pull everyone together to this whole net positive, sustainable business model, so that everybody sort of understands this whole idea? Because even Balipara Foundation and Nature Economics is exactly that, trying to really see the economic side of nature as well. So over to you.
Well, I think if you look at Mission Life, Lifestyle for Environment, says it all. Uh, it talks about how we can make individual responsible for the actions that we are taking. And while we talk about corporates, when we talk about maybe let's say the net zero, the NDCs, the national determined contributions, all this boils down to individual aspirations and individual actions, and that plays an extremely important role. So how do we focus on from the big agenda of sustainable development goals 2030 to let's say the individual goals where we all look at what harm we are doing through our own actions? So once we start creating that sort of environment and awareness, I think the results would come automatically. A lot of times it boils down to youth, and we say that if we educate a youth, I think the entire family is taken care of. Like it was said for the women, I today say for young children as well, because I know when I work with young children, uh, these children go back and talk to their families, not to kind of mix the waste. So a lot of times when we talk about anything which is related to net zero, it boils down, if you really look at it, is to the waste that we are generating, and are we segregating that? Because again, if we do not segregate at the base level, at the unit level, which is a family, it boils down to a huge problem which we see in our urban local bodies. Every single person is saying that we cannot retract the waste, especially now we talk about the legacy waste in Delhi, Mumbai, and other urban areas, is because the segregation isn't happening. So why not change the individual actions? And when we see the three phases of mission life, the first one is the awareness, the second one is the production, and then the consumption patterns. I think these are very, very important stages and have been listed in a very thoughtful manner as to how India should look at this. Again, coming back to what she was saying is, unless we are talking about the big things, they are important, I don't say, and I'm not undermining their importance, but at the same time the individual plays an extremely important role, and that is what I would say. Public sector organizations, let's say the civil society and non-profits, do play an extremely important role in creating that awareness, and I think Balipara is doing a very good job in that. uh, with that, I think many more organizations are working towards it, and involving youth, involving uh, the younger generation is the most important thing. I think another very important area that I would like to strategize is the focus on digitization of the things, which is again very important when we have a population of 1.4 billion people. Anything that we want to do at a grassroots level, maybe okay, we need decentralized systems. I totally agree with that. A solution, one solution doesn't fit all. India is such a diverse country, from Himalayan states to say the coastal areas. The problems are diverse, and so are the challenges. And I'm sure it poses a lot of opportunity for a lot of work that needs to go around. But at the same time, digitalization of things will kind of multiply the impact that we are trying to create. So that should be a focus areas. Impact investments, I'm sure you people are working on them, is a very, very important thing to play and see how this impact could be created. I'm sure Tata's is doing a wonderful job there, but a kind of a consortium, a kind of a platform that could help everyone to bring on one area where this could be multiplied is something I think is the need of the hour, and that could be one leading platform that could take place. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Shalini. And I love the fact that you talked about something very simple as education. And it is so true. And if I reflect where Bangladesh has come, so if you look at the move of its in human development index, has been large part of access to safe water, access to sanitation, lots of work happening around it in terms of eradicating polio, for example. And there's a huge amount of communication did. And I think the second point on digitalization sort of helps us in today's world, because you probably can multiply it in so many ways. Yeah, thank you so much. I think that was very wonderful. Now I'm coming to the audience because I've been asking all the questions, and you've been patiently listening. Yes, firstly, the gentleman on the front. Do you have a? Can I ask a microphone for him, please, so that if I may request you to introduce yourself and the question, and if any particular individual. Uh, oh, it's a small hall. You're right.
India and Bangladesh, we are sitting together. And as Luna Madam said, that it's only 5 meters ahead from sea level. So, with the Indian context, I would like to say that our Prime Minister said the 2070 is a net zero. And maybe the many industries would be happy. I know that Tata Sustainability Group is not happy in that way. They are doing something. But if you will see that entire industry, steel industry in India is based on carbon. They are working on carbon. Carbon emission is big. And countries like Bangladesh and Sundarban area of India, they are the most vulnerable. The plan which COP26 produced, it is not going to change the destiny of these kind of countries, or maybe the certain portion of Mumbai also. So, what will be the next that corporate can think for the livelihood development of amphibian kind of livelihood in these kind of places? Because yes, they have to face tremendous cyclone, floods, many more things. And what will be the future after 15 years? Bangladesh and Sundarban are nearby. What?
You want to ask him for the question?
Oh, that's for me.
Yeah.
So it's a fair question. Okay, I really won't be able to offer a view on the Sundarban area specifically, but I think let's talk steel for a second since you brought it up. I think one is it's one of the hardest to abate sectors that we are doing because of technology choices, because of capital costs, etc. Technology choices more than capital costs on the transition. Uh, the absence of technological choices, right? But again, having said that, one is on use consumption of resources. One of our obsessions right now is to reduce consumption of resources in the process of steel making, right from raw materials to the end delivery of steel. I think you spoke about SaaS. We also have SaaS of our steel as a solution. How do you consumerize what is essentially a product? But our water consumption has gone down by about 80% in the last 4.5 5 years. We are looking at technologies which significantly reduce the per capita consumption of carbon across, and there's a lot of information exchange that happens between Europe, Indian operations, etc. Now, that's just a list of what's happening, and that's our job to do that. As I said earlier, it's the right thing to do, we'll do it. Second is, I think this investment in what we are trying to do is, our approach is this, okay, as far as taking the entire ecosystem along. Currently, just FYI, there are 4 species, including green species, that we are working on a conservation model, which is a community-led conservation model. There are large rewilding processes. We are acutely conscious that 10,000 trees don't make a forest. There is much more to a forest systems. What we are also realizing, and one of the, apart from all the initiatives, etc., that we will plan, what we are also realizing is something that I touched upon briefly, saying that the the custodians of ecology, so to say, are not the scientists of ecology, right? So there's a conversation that happens in conference rooms, that happens in conferences like these, which is very important. I was talking of Samvad, where the only reason we are doing that dialogue, we are asked that question repeatedly. What's the quarterly outcome of that? Kiska life badla? What happened? But that's not the, especially a Club of Rome kind of construct, right? You understand what I'm saying? The idea is, how do you get these perspectives which are not available in Excel sheets, which are not available in PowerPoints, which is basically wisdom for which you need to have the patience to understand, get out of your own shoes, hear them, listen to them, and understand what's being said. That to us is the magic pill that we are trying to look at, because wherever we've now, as Tata's, there's a whale shark story in Tata Chemicals in Mithapur that has played out quite well, right? There are some other efforts that we're doing. Wherever we are finding any success, limited success, etc., is this understanding of this large, that it's a very interdependent, interdisciplinary system, and we understand the we understand the nodes, but we don't understand the connectors, right? And the entire effort around Samvad is to look at what those connectors are. And I mean, just to give you a sense, I think through Samvad, 17 languages have got their first dictionaries, and their first fonts. There are, anyway, I mean, that's a list we'll discuss offline, not to, but to us, that's where the magic is, apart from everything else that we're doing. So That's what. Same thing for Sundarbans. A lot of the areas that you're talking about may not be tribal indigenous population in the true nature of things, but just an understanding that, I'm sorry, I'm repeating myself, but to me, that's the magic pill, and that's the one thing that's completely missing from the discourse right now. So that's where it is.
Great, thank you. I hope that sort of answers the perspective. Romana, you speaker, why don't you?
Thank you. This is a great discussion. I'm Gitika Goswami. I work for Development Alternative. I'm an AVP of Development Alternatives. My question, two questions. One is when we are talking about the net zero or net positive, the big companies are doing great jobs, okay? But my question is, what about the smalls, the micro enterprises? How are you really ensure that the micro enterprises, which are the kind of the supply of these big industries, how you make sure that they will be net zero? That's the big challenge. And my other question is about the finance, the same thing for the micro enterprise. When you talk about green finance, uh, all the big companies, you can say that, even the textile, the big one, they can do really good on the sustainability issues, on waste management and everything. What about the micro enterprise, where the people are like 4 to 10 people in one enterprise? How they, with their limited resources, can really access a green finance? Thank you.
Can I request maybe Shalini take the SME one because you work with the ecosystem, and then the financing maybe Namashi could take that.
Thank you. I think that's a very pertinent question when you talk about the transition, and specifically just transition. It is quite essential to understand how the entire supply chain will be impacted and how will they make a change. Uh, I see right now, if I look at today's scenario, I think there are two enabling environments for it. The very first, I would say, is uh, the big corporates themselves do understand that unless they build entire supply chain net zero, they will not be able to have an impact on their own assessments as well. So when they calculate, and I would be thankful again to the policy of, let's say, the ESG, the reporting mechanism that has come up, is enabling that kind of change. So I see the large corporates, you talked about the textile sector particularly for that sake, and I without quoting the name, I know the textile hubs in India, and how the big corporates are really looking at their scope 3 emissions already. So unless they will look at that, they're quite aware of the fact that they need to understand that. So that's the very first enabling environment. The second is, I think the government does understand, and specifically in case of India, I can definitely tell you because I'm working with the Ministry of MSME, and how their focus is shifting towards these sector. See, India is, and so far Bangladesh as well, I mean, there is a very high similarity on that front. We do understand that our major production houses come from the SME sector, not from the large corporate sector. And unless we make a change there, we'll not be able to meet any of our targets, be it at the national level, at the corporate level, individual or combined efforts. And that is why there is a huge focus. You must have heard, if you're from Development Alternatives, right? You said, so you know about the policy that MSME has come up. Uh, it's about calculating the net zero of the SMEs, right? And zero defect, zero effect, as it is called, the Z policy, is again a step towards enabling that kind of environment, which will help the SMEs to also understand that they need to make a change. So I see, to answer, it's not something that is going to happen immediately because it is a huge investment based kind of a model, the transition. But at the same time, the enabling environment will let it happen, and it has to happen through that environment. That's how I see it. Maybe anyone else would like to add to
Yeah,
it, perhaps.
let me add with the Shalini. So somehow my discussion always comes up with the numbers. So interestingly, if you look at the Bangladesh as a country, you mentioned about the Mumbai's water level and other factors. So one third of the country is supposed to have been watered by 2050 as well. So that sort of discussion is very much strongly there. Now we talk about how that environmental challenge can be addressed. One way to look at is we as Standard Chartered is a bank for the bankers. So there are 60 odd banks in the country. What we do is we also try to portray the similar sort of a structure and put in place in terms of the control mechanism when we finance the banks as well. So to see the best practices. Recently, Central Bank has come up with multiple such plans in terms of sustainable development plan and then how to finance it, the parameter wise, and then give a lot more emphasis. So if I'm good for the second part of your question that you have mentioned about the SME sort of a platform. So look, SME contributes about 28% of the economy, and an SME is a big supporter for the large corporates, including multinationals. What we see is Central Bank has recently came up with the 25,000 crore Taka sort of a proposal where they're going to support SMEs, definitely to the banks, but especially focus on sustainable and greens focus. So that's definitely gives a lot more focus on SMEs to boost up. Secondly, when we see the new generations are coming up, Western educations, new generations are coming up, very high skillful thought process, and they're very cautious and careful in terms of sustainability and score of their mind. So even they are part of a smaller scale industries, but the thought process they are bringing to the table in terms of next generations, sustainability, green funding, how that can impact our society, is a phenomenon. So when we see those young entrepreneurs, young generation, especially on SME size, may not be as 4 to 10, but 50 to 100 sort of employees, we see a significant change in mindset sort of thought process when they think about greeneries and sustainable development.
So just a quick on ma'am. So I'm one of the authors of the NGRBC, National Guidelines on Responsible Business in India, right? So about 97% of the total top line of industry in India is from micro MSME, etc. That's not going to change. $10 trillion economy, whatever it is, it might be a plus one. So it's something that's going to be around. What's also happening is because of disclosures now, the point that Shalini was making, there's a lot of pressure on value chains. Even some of our larger companies like Tata Steel has a pressure from Tata Motors, right? When you're doing a steel thing, etc. So we're all parts of value chains. One is that pressure to be transferred, three things. One is that pressure to be transferred in a slightly empathetic manner. Don't just sort of put out a policy and say, have conversations, have focus on vendor development. That's one. Second is it's not just access to additional capital. It could be incentives within the capital investment that they're doing for your own business. How are you creating incentives for businesses who are, say, socially more responsible, or say greener than the others? So there, whether it's, relaxation of bank guarantee requirements, or whether it's, more attractive rates, or maybe even design procurement processes. As I said, if it's the right thing to do, then you take the bet on that. So incentives. Third is, and it's a point that he made, and which is very interesting, that we keep talking of the startup ecosystem. One has to start looking at your own value chain as a startup ecosystem in itself, because most of the smaller businesses are startups. They may be old startups or whatever it is. And therefore, a lot of our work with value chains is also to keep sparking that entrepreneurial spirit, not as a EDI kind of entrepreneurial development program, but just invest confidence in the fact that these are startups who may have actually come up to address a business need that you have. So, but the second one is a very tangible one, where how are we designing a procurement process to incentivize the right investments? So these three things, ma'am.
Great, wonderful. I just realized I've significantly overran. Clearly, I've done a bad job of moderating. But thank you so much to the panel for the insights. Runa Khan had to drop off because she's got another engagement, but Enamul, Huque, Sourav, and Shalini as well. Thank you so much for the fantastic insight. I hope all of you enjoyed. And it's been wonderful. And Balipara Foundation, once again, thank you so much for coming to Dhaka and Bangladesh and really being another of those forces that moves us in the right direction. Thank you so much for your patient listening.
Hello.